are. This is another episode of WiseTalks from Inner Outer You Institute, and I want to welcome my guest. Of course, my name is Terry Hodgkinson, you know that, but I want to welcome our guest today, Makoto and Kabayama, I think is his last name. So I've trained with Makoto in the past, probably about 15 years ago, and I had a wonderful training experience with Makoto. So much so that when I was putting this series together for talks that I wanted to do and share wisdom from leaders in our community and around the world, I instantly thought of Makoto as being a guest on our show. So Makoto, welcome. Thank you very much. Maybe if you're getting... Makoto, you have a long history of being in the martial arts, and I remember hearing you say once that you started when you were a teenager.
That's correct. Yeah. I was 14 years old, and I started with my father, who was a Kendo sensei at the Takahashi Judo Club in Ottawa.
Okay.
And after a couple of years there, we both moved to Toronto, and I began studying at the Hatashita Judo Club. Okay. Excellent club here. And I was studying Jiu-Jitsu primarily and some Kendo there as well. I was really on a search. I was doing a roots thing, and I was looking for a traditional Japanese martial arts club, what I thought was traditional. I was studying the philosophy and history of the samurai at the time, and Bushido, wow. And that's what I was looking for. I had a tough time. My impression of tradition is still very different from what some people's interpretation of tradition.
And can you give us an idea of what you mean by that in relation to the training itself?
Absolutely.
What would the difference be?
I think the first difference in many environments is the notion of one art versus another. To the samurai, they couldn't be prejudiced as to where they learned from. You wanted to be the best you could in that field, regardless of where that knowledge, where that tool, where you learned this material came from. It wasn't a matter of a Japanese art or Korean art, or even karate versus judo, or in my case, my Kendo instructor didn't want me studying Jiu-Jitsu at the same time. And I felt that was not a traditional attitude.
Right, right.
I continued to research, cross-train with as many different people as I could. I was looking for something both functional and spiritual. And one day I came across an article by Bruce Lee, an essay by Bruce Lee.
Right.
And in a black belt magazine, and I was reading this article by this supposedly radical, new, modern, unclassical martial artist. And yet what I was reading philosophically was the most traditional material I've read in a long time.
Got it. Yeah.
And at the time, there was nowhere in Canada to study. In fact, there was only 2 schools in the world back then.
Oh, wow.
And
just for the audience, what we're talking about, of course, is... Yeah, no, that's good. What we're talking about, of course, is JKD, otherwise known as Jeet Kun, which was Bruce Lee's art that he had developed through many years of experimentation and, working with many martial artists. And that's how I came to know Makoto, actually, because he runs a JKD society, or a group of training and summer camps and all these other things that I found very interesting, and did some of that and found it to be very top quality. So yeah, go ahead with the JKD.
Yeah. So Jeet Kun was considered to be radical, and Bruce Lee was, I was often, when I would ask about Bruce Lee, most of the traditional martial arts instructors would say, oh, that's just the movies, blah, 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 and write it off. And, but I was intrigued. And one day I saw a little blurb in the magazine about an opportunity to go to a summer camp in St. Louis, Missouri. And it was the first time I'd seen an opportunity to train in these arts.
Yeah, right.
And a gentleman named Danny Santo was teaching there. He was quite well famous.
Yeah, and Danny Santo, of course, was Bruce Lee's one of his top students.
That's correct. Yeah. And another gentleman who I'd never heard of, named Paul Vunat.
Oh yes, yes.
And Stephen Hayes was there at that time as well, the famous Ninpo Taijutsu instructor.
Right.
And so I hopped on a Greyhound and went down to St. Louis, Missouri with my little, whatever I could scrounge around, and met Paul Vunak and Daniel Santo and Stephen Hayes as well. And I had just an amazing time. It was everything I was looking for. It was extremely functional. I had a very practical street fighting background, so I could recognize what was functional right away, what made sense to me from my own experiences.
Right.
It was equally philosophical and spiritual.
Yeah, now let's talk a little bit about that, because a lot of people, when they look at martial arts, they have this sort of opinion that martial arts is about fighting, martial arts is really only about fighting or kicking and punching. And for me, in my experience in growing up through the martial arts, yeah, there is some of that. I mean, obviously there is the combative aspect of martial arts, but in my experience, there's so much more. There's a lot more that you can learn from studying martial arts than just kicking and punching, and I'm sure Makoto, can tell you a little bit about his experience with that as well.
Absolutely. I think, I was really blessed when I got into the Jeet Kun because it was interesting to go down to the summer camp. Daniel Santo's a famous name, and there are quite a few people tailoring around Daniel Santo now. In fact, he had somewhere around 60 or 70 people in his class, and he had one person assisting him. Coincidentally, another Canadian, a gentleman named Cass Magda, who was from Niagara Falls and was introduced to Jeet Kun before me, but chose to stay living in California as opposed to moving back to Canada. Now, I was with Paul Vunak. We had 12 people in our class. I chose the art over the name. And we had 5 assistants to our class, or a 2-to-1 student-instructor ratio.
Wow.
For a 40-hour week
of
Jeet Kun.
Isn't that amazing? Top
Top
quality instruction.
Wow.
With small numbers.
Overwhelming.
Yes.
I was just fascinated. I think what really got me was some of the stuff, not just the material, not just the physical stuff, but it was the philosophy that hooked me. I remember one time Paul Vunak, he stopped and he said to everybody, okay, why are you here? What brought you into Jeet Kun? And I would say that almost everybody there sort of put up their hands and was saying self-defense, because it was well known for being practical and functional.
Yes.
So then he said, well, when's the last time you had a fight? When's the next time you anticipate having a fight? He said, well, there has to be some other reason for you being here, because if you're just training here to fight, you're wasting your time. And I thought that was brilliant.
Yes, yeah. Yeah, and I think most people who have spent enough time in martial arts training, and I'm talking not just 2 years, I'm talking decades, you will hear from them that it's not just about the combative aspect of it. There is so much more that can evolve out of martial arts. To me, it's always been a mode, a method, a way of actually seeing yourself personally develop as a human being.
Yes.
Because you can gauge it through how you apply your art.
Absolutely.
And you can see the results in the strength of mind, the stability of emotion, the purity of spirit.
Yes.
And of course, physically you get into good shape too.
Doesn't hurt you.
You're all around. It's good. Which is good for me, because I like to, keep working out and exercising. Otherwise, as you get older, I mean, you're looking pretty good there, in good shape.
We'll hang in there.
For me, my family has a little bit on the heavier side, so I got to keep working out.
Right.
But this is the thing is with Makoto. I mean, he's trained with some of the top-notch people in the world when it comes to JKD and other martial arts as well. And why I respect Makoto is because it's not just about the fighting aspect, even though he has a lot of experience in that. And I respect that because martial arts has a martial component to it, but also it has that growth aspect to it. It has that personal development aspect and getting in touch, I think, with some of the finer things in life, with some of the finer perspectives and qualities. And when I look at Makoto, and I've known him for years, and I look at other people that I highly respect, it comes down to a way of life rather than a hobby. It's something that you do because you are inclined. It's a calling, and you can have good times and rough times, but you continue to follow that path. So Makoto, why don't you go ahead and speak about if there's such a thing as calling it a path for you?
Yes,
what's that about for you?
And I think that you bring up a very good point, and I would say that I actually have a bit of a tough time with some of this terminology. I'll give you an example. When I hear about something like the book, The Art of War, the character Wu, which is represented as war,
right,
in this, or in Japan it's pronounced Bu,
okay,
as in Bushido.
Right.
It's almost always translated, or the word Bushi is almost always translated as warrior.
Right.
Now, the root of the word war, right, is Germanic, comes from vering, right, which means to cause panic or confusion. Now, the root of the word bu is a hand stopping a spear.
Huh. Okay.
Which is a totally different connotation.
Right, yeah.
So
I never knew that.
The Bushi was a professional, in theory and in ideal, a professional peacemaker or peacekeeper, not a war maker.
Yeah, no, that makes sense, yes.
And that changes the whole interpretation for many people of the art.
Yes, yes.
That it's not the art of war at all. It's the art of peace.
Now that you mention that, it brings me to a point. I wrote a book in 2009 called Memoirs of a Wandering Ninja. And in it, I give some history of, the Shaolin monks, the samurai, ninja. And in part of that history, I was fascinated when I was doing research, because the samurai, like anybody else, were in the beginning and all the way through, were very devout to who they were serving. Okay. And if they were told through whatever faction that they had to go in and they had to take out a certain fragment of, whatever, they would go in and do it. At one point early on in the samurai history, they would go in, and because the ruling classes thought that the Zen monasteries were out of touch and perhaps a bit too persuasive, and they would go in and burn them down and do things, and they would see these Zen masters totally unafraid, totally serene in meditation, and I remember researching it to the point where they looked at that and they said, I have a lot of respect for this, because somebody who does not fear and is not lifting a sword against me either, but does not fear, let's say, death.
There's a quality that we can use, we can learn.
Exactly, exactly, and that sort of marriage at that point, which also gave them, I think, a higher standard quality of thinking.
Yeah, I think if you go back, I look back at tradition, and actually I'll interrupt just for a second, because there's one of the, I guess, tenets of the Bushi, of the samurai, that people often quote or refer to as something called giri, or duty, and it is most often, modern terms, translated as loyalty, and the interpretation is that duty is to their lord in most cases, or their commanding officer, much like in a military situation. And it's interesting because my grandfather, whose father fought at Kamakura in the wars of the last samurai, said to me that the duty of the samurai, or the giri, is to help those less fortunate.
Yes.
And that's the duty of the samurai.
Right.
But like many other things throughout history, these loyalties and responsibilities are manipulated and turned and swayed. So that the samurai's real giri, or real duty, was to the greater good. And again, through different interpretations, and as it's been translated, it became something else.
Right.
I feel that when in studying traditional martial arts and looking back and being a little bit of a lay historian, and I admit that originally through the Japanese martial arts, but you can't help but be touch bases with other arts because they cross paths all the time.
Definitely.
Is that the tradition of all these arts is really a matter of self-exploration, art, play, interaction, not just this closed off, encapsulated action. People, I think many over the years, and you've seen it some places, I'm sure, where the martial arts is just merely motions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and they're just going through the motions.
It's kind of empty.
It's empty.
Yeah, it's like a shell.
It's just a
the
shell.
person's moving through with the shell.
And that's so far from tradition.
Right.
And sometimes you see people going through all the ritual of tradition.
Mm-hmm.
All the bowing and so on and so forth, and etiquette.
Yes.
Exemplary.
Yes.
But it's such a hollow manner.
And this is bringing me back to the point where I say that, you know, martial arts is so much more than just kicking and punching,
Mm-hmm.
an empty motion. And I believe, you know, as an example, one of the articles in the news today is
Mm-hmm.
about that young lady who unfortunately was bullied to the point online where she committed suicide. I think she was about 15
Yes,
years old.
tragic.
And that just kind of broke my heart.
Mm-hmm.
I thought, had she have been able to find a good martial arts school and put some time into really growing from within
Yes.
and developing that
Yes.
self-confidence
Yes.
and developing that perspective of, you know, and I mentioned the word warrior here, but I don't mean in the
Yes,
sense of war.
we
I just
understand.
mean it being tough,
Right,
you know,
absolutely.
being internally, and it gives you that ability to face a lot of things
Yes.
in life that come at you. I can't emphasize enough that if you are a parent out there and you are considering putting your child into something, think about martial arts, because if you find a good school, and that's a different, you know, topic on finding a good school, but you know, when you find good teachers and you find a good place for your child to train, it could make a world of difference in their life. And I'm speaking from experience because martial arts changed my life from a kid who was going down the wrong path, hanging out with the wrong people,
Absolutely.
doing the wrong
Me too.
things, and it kind of slapped me upside the head and said, hey, you want to be a good martial artist, you better change your way.
That's the bottom line.
In your life experience, because you've been doing this for quite some time, in your students' experience, have you seen your students not just make physical, combative leaps and bounds,
Oh,
but
yeah.
also some internal?
Absolutely. I think that with anything, the difference and the changes as a human being are far more powerful than just the self-defense success stories.
Yeah.
You know, we hope that our students will never have to use what we teach them. I think that's the reality. But on the other hand, I think we're both would say that I'm proud when I hear my students using it in everyday life.
Yes.
The mindfulness, the
Exactly.
sensitivity, the awareness, and the strength of self-esteem to behave, I would say, in their right manner, for themselves,
Yes.
to express themselves, be able to express themselves openly, honestly, and safely.
Yes.
I think this is the best reward of all. And I remember my first Jeet Kune student. I didn't really want to teach. I didn't think I knew enough.
Right.
And I still wonder. I'm 25 years into Jeet Kune concepts, or 29 years into Jeet Kune concepts now, and I'm still a baby. I think I'm still a baby. I'm still learning things about the most basic of exercises.
Right.
And I remember this. I kept sending him to other schools, and he kept coming back saying, "This is what I'm looking for. Can't you just show me something?" And I watched this shy Asian boy just bloom.
Right.
And those kind of
That's
rewards are
beautiful.
so great.
That is really beautiful. We see that.
Another one of my students I met when he was a skinhead panhandling on the street.
Mm.
And my partner at the time said, "Well, we haven't got any money, but tell you what, you know, why don't you come check this guy out,
Right.
you know, and talk to this guy, and
Yeah.
he'll give you a cup of coffee and you talk." And within a few years, I had some of these kids who went off to university, and just amazing transformations as people, as they discover themselves. And I think the confidence is so great from martial arts.
Yeah.
And knowing that it's okay to make mistakes.
Yes.
The learning about the learning process. I think that's probably the other thing that Jeet Kune gave me more than anything else is that the courage to learn.
Yes.
I don't know if that makes sense to people, but
and when you say courage to learn, that's also including the courage to fail.
Exactly.
Because it's through a lot of. I often tell my students, I have hit the ground more times.
You know it.
Than you can count. And every time I hit that ground, I learn something different about what am I going to do the next time.
We learn more by losing.
Absolutely.
Than by
Absolutely.
winning.
But just on another aspect of what you're saying with your students, and I think this is important, I really get a lot of satisfaction out of seeing students who take the principles that you teach in martial arts, because the principles are nobody's, they're not mine, nobody owns these principles, they're principles of natural law that you've discovered through your training, and then you pass them on to other people and you say, hey, have you seen this before? Try this works for me, why don't you try it out? But then these students take these principles and they go out into life, and you might not hear from them for 10 years or 20 years, but all of a sudden one day you get an email. And I just actually got an email from a student of mine quite a while ago named Juan, who's living in Costa Rica now. And he says, I don't think I ever got a chance to thank you, but what you taught me back then has helped me become a professional tennis player, a professional artist. And he says it's that mode. And what did I do? All I really did was say, hey, here are some principles that are effective in martial arts, not just in martial arts, because when I say martial arts, I mean life. It's a path.
Sure.
And isn't it beautiful to see that?
I think it's wonderful. We use martial arts as a medium.
Yes.
But the media, it's just a medium. And I think art in life, I think art just in general is such an important part of life.
Yeah.
And that martial arts, to me, my Jeet Kune concept is a fine art. It involves personal input.
Right.
It involves expressing yourself as a human being through your art.
Bringing that artist in you out.
Absolutely. Expressing yourself.
Yes. Which is what art is all about.
Right.
In whatever manner you choose to do it. It's expressing the essence of who you are.
And then whether you're, and like many of our students, whether they end up in the art of fighting, martial arts specifically, or they end up in a visual art or a musical art, or even just the art of life, negotiating a life, growing, raising a family.
And let's face it, we're all in the art of life, right?
That's right.
It doesn't matter what else you apply the martial art principles to. If you want to become a top tennis player, soccer player, whatever,
you got it.
Those are extras. Those are bonuses. But let's face it, getting up, working each day to provide for your family, taking care of your kids, your loved ones, doing the things that need to be done on a daily basis, that's the art of life.
That's the art of life. And the rest of frills almost.
Yeah.
I remember, again, going back to my first Jeet Kune experience, Paul Vuena compared ways of approaching combat very similar to ways of buying a used car. And it was great because he made the comparison of really what he was showing was how things like timing, sensitivity, awareness, being pre-armed with knowledge, how it changes encounters and how it affects relationships.
Right, totally.
And what it really illustrated to us, I think, as students, is that it doesn't just apply fighting. And it made it very clear and very quickly that these elements, again, timing, sensitivity, any relationship, spatial relationships sometimes,
and the beautiful thing about martial arts, talking about relationships, is because as much as I do, when you have a significant other in your life, that you don't always win.
That's correct.
And there's goodness in bowing out, knowing when to shut up.
That's right. And know when to fight, know when to run.
That's right. So well-rounded martial arts is what I'm talking about, what Makoto's talking about. And I think really, if you find any teacher who's been doing this for quite some time, this is what they'll be talking about too, because I think the path leads you to a point where you have to face that. And if you don't face that evolution on a human, sort of consciousness scale, on going to other levels, taking your martial arts to other levels, then you kind of stay stuck, and you kind of stay sort of in areas that like we were talking about before, it's more of a shallow experience. And
it stagnates. It gets boring, in fact, I think, for myself. It's not enough for me.
Yes.
I need that stimulation. I like the challenge. And much like teaching, teaching's such a wonderful learning experience as well. We get to share what we know. We learn from our students every day.
Oh, yes.
And the process of each new individual and that relationship and cultivating that relationship is such a rewarding experience. And again, as I said, a learning experience for both of us.
Yes.
As you go, but it's a real joy that martial arts is our vehicle.
Yes.
Now, I believe you can reach this through any path.
Yes.
There's people who are artists in, the Zen and the art of motorcycle mechanics. Equally, I find that martial arts, as a medium, there's much less room for BS.
Yes.
When you're there, it either works or it doesn't work.
Yeah.
And you can, pose and do everything you want.
Yeah.
But when it gets down there, if it doesn't work.
Yeah, exactly. This is the beautiful thing about martial arts is that test.
Yes.
And a lot of people who I've worked with in the past, they do a lot of meditation seminars too, and I'm one with the universe. I'm totally in unison, and I say, okay, let's test that out. And you find out that a lot of people are really in their heads.
Yes.
And that's okay to a degree if that's all what you're looking for, but martial arts has this sobriety. It has this real method of, okay, if you're one with things, then you'll be able to flow on a physical level as well and make these concepts work to a very high level. I'm not saying you're going to be perfect all the time, but
of course not.
To a very high level of proficiency. And that's the beautiful thing is when it comes down to it and you get on the floor and you test out what you're either mentally centered and emotionally stable and you feel spiritually at peace, that this flows physically or you're not, and it's a great indicator to see where you're at with all
Exactly. And you loses your deception of yourself, your ego, of course, because your mistakes become out there for everyone.
Yes.
And I think you learn the strength of making mistakes and being honest about them.
Yes.
You learn that to learn, you have to be open to critique, and critique isn't always negative.
Right.
And that's the kind of thing I think many people, their egos get caught up.
Yes.
And even in the martial arts, there's people who just want to prove something or show something or display something. And again, martial arts is much more than that.
Yeah.
That it's not about achieving levels of anything, really. I'm sure, like yourself, I've got several pieces of paper, but I still, again, going back to Paul Vunak, because he was my most influential Kendo instructor, when he gave me my first certificate, he said, "So what's different now?"
Yeah. Here's a piece of paper.
Yeah. And I decided that right then and there that it was the person or the individual that made the certificate mean something, not the certificate that made the individual mean something.
Yeah, totally. I totally agree with you there. Yes.
And that's a difference with a lot of other arts. Some people's practices as well, that we're not so concerned with the superficial.
The students that I have now, I teach informally now. I used to have a fair-sized commercial school before, which I sold, and now I enjoy the space where I have a bunch of devoted students that come because they really want the art, they want the skill, they want the philosophy. And I told them, I said, what you would call black belt, black sash, that kind of skill level, I say, don't expect anything before 10 years. And they're, really? I said, yeah. I said, it's going to take you, and 10 years is a good span of time if you're working it regularly, to really hone a lot of the skills.
Yes. Yeah.
And I said, I'm not going to give you any belts, any sashes, anything in between where you start now in a 10-year period. And I said, so get used to just enjoying showing up, training the techniques, training the principles, training what you're doing, and forget about this.
Absolutely.
Do I get my next belt?
Exactly.
Do I get, if that's what you're focused on, then that becomes really what your mindset is.
And I've said the same thing to people, that if you're looking to be an instructor and you're in a hurry, I'm afraid you best be somewhere else.
Yes.
I have a reputation for being very difficult. By the time I apprentice people, I like them to be of a standard of an instructor, and I think the real part of the reason was with all the let's say mystique around Jeet Kun concepts, particularly that people don't really understand it. Sometimes people have funny ideas of it. I wanted my students to be above reproach, regardless of where they train, and that it didn't matter whether they were in a Jeet Kun school or any school, that their training would show, even if they're beginning as a white belt somewhere, that they will carry themselves and perform themselves in a manner which is above criticism.
Yes, I totally agree with that. That's a great point.
And that's what I wanted with my own students.
Awesome.
That's my philosophy as far as making instructors go.
Fantastic. And you've been doing it for a long time now, so I'm sure you've trained some people who are out there.
I've trained some pretty good
teaching JKD concepts.
I'm very proud of them.
You should be, because Makoto's been doing this for many years, and I know I showed up at a summer camp of his one time, and I can't remember how many people were there, but there was a great amount of people and a great amount of instructors who were teaching anything from grappling to jiu-jitsu to boxing to everybody sort of had a specialty, and you just rotated around these different specialties, and then at the end of it you put it all together and you had a whole bunch of great skills, and you found out what worked for you, and maybe some other stuff didn't work so well, so you concentrated on what worked for you, which is really what Bruce Lee's philosophy was all about.
A lot of it is, to me, it's just about the expressing yourself physically now, or in this case, in a physical and self-defense manner, in the most efficient, effective way possible for you. And there's still a little bit of controversy mills every now and then where people say that Jeet Kun is this and Jeet Kun is that and this kind of stuff, which of course contradicts most of C.J. Bruce's writings. But with all that hoopla going on, everybody's different. And I've had students in wheelchairs, I've had students with paralysis, students with all kinds of different physical differences.
And they can still be a part of it and
Absolutely.
still use it.
Everybody can express themselves to the best of their ability. And that's all we're really trying to do. We're not trying to make anybody, we recognize that nobody's invincible. And we'll never be perfect.
And that's what keeps us going.
Exactly.
Because we enjoy that challenge of continually evolving.
Exactly. And we appreciate it. Once you accept that, I think that makes the path a little bit
Now, Makoto, where
easier.
can people get a hold of you? If they're interested in doing some training with you or learning more about what you do, can you give your contact information so that they know?
Sure. My phone number is 647-864-9154.
Say that one more time for them.
That's 864-9154, and that's area code 647. So that's 647-864-9154. And you can reach me through email at, makoto.kabayama@gmail.com, which is a little long for some of you, so I'll give you another one, which is nipkicks@gmail.com. And we also have a website up right now. It's www.thirddegreemartialarts.com, and that's run by one of my students, a gentleman named Rosario.
Awesome. Now, all this information I'll also put in text, so you'll be able to get it there. But keep in mind that Makoto is a traditional martial artist, but he is not necessarily a person who has gone out of his way to make a huge commercial sort of artistry. So for him, the quality, the time has always been in the training, and all the other things about websites and all that other stuff.
That's right.
Has sort of been, yeah, okay, well, when we get around to that, we'll get around to it.
I'm not a salesman.
No, and that's what I like about Makoto. So if you have the opportunity and you can meet with Makoto in person and talk with him, because this interview it's a very, very small, smidgen of what Makoto knows. So please feel free to give him a call. Feel free to set up a time to meet with him in person. And if you're a martial artist, or if you want to become a person who wants to study the martial arts and you've never done so before, please take some training with Makoto, and I'm sure you will be as pleased and as satisfied as I have been. And I can recommend it very highly. So I want to thank Makoto very much for being here.
Thank you again. It's my pleasure.
Thanks very much for being on the show. And this has been another episode of Wise Talks. And I want to just say one more time thank you to my guest Makoto Kabayama for being here. And we'll see you next time.